When someone first attempts to get into philosophy, they may be surprised by the lack of conventional textbooks available on the subject. While scientific fields are dominated by prestigious textbooks available for students of the field, philosophy has no such definitive resources. My own experience of Philosophy 101 involved the book A History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell, which, similar to other philosophy resources, reads like a regular book rather than a textbook. This phenomenon is due to the fact that philosophy, unlike other disciplines, is not reducible to a set of truth claims. A physics textbook is a series of propositions supported by evidence in the scientific method that comprise a greater body of knowledge we call contemporary physics. Philosophy, on the other hand, is not necessarily a body of knowledge. Much of, or even the majority of, philosophy is hardly considerable as knowledge at all. The physics textbook leaves little to no room for discussion of corpuscularianism, for example, because such a theory is too refuted by modern science to be considered knowledge. But philosophy, being intrinsically linked to the history of ideas, is not complete without such a discussion. That demonstrates how scientific fields both accumulate propositions and discard them, whereas philosophy, unable to drop antiquated ideas from its purview, only accumulates them ad nauseum. Philosophy is a long series of false starts and dead ends that don't allow for a definitive arrangement of knowledge to be decided on. Even logic, the most objective aspect of philosophy, has been unable to officially replace Aristotelian logic with analytic symbolic logic, and neither should it. All this is to say that if you want to get into philosophy, no one book will be sufficient to get you to a competent level. To become educated in philosophy, you're going to have to read a lot of books, and those books have covers. For most of philosophy's history, books were recorded as manuscripts which lacked what would now be called graphic design. Even with the advent of the printing press in the 15th century, books remained relatively plain with primarily functional covers. It wasn't until color printing and the rise of the paperback that books started to feature unique graphic designs for covers. No publisher is more responsible for great book designs than Penguin Random House, who revolutionized book design with their tastefully simple classics series. Penguin's classy designs elevated the paperback above its pulp status and influenced the trajectory of book design for the future. Today, Penguin's Black Classic series is the pinnacle of book design. Every enthusiast of philosophy is bound to have some of these books. When looking for a classic book available from multiple publishers, I always opt for the Penguins for their covers as well as their quality translations and paper. Penguin Classics is a templated design, a standardized system of graphics presenting a unique image to accompany a black strip with the title and author. Black goes with everything, making it perfect for a templated design that has to adapt to the style of the cover image, and the orange text is a subtle highlight that adds character and branding. The use of all caps Futura and italic Mrs. Eves, two of my favorite typefaces, is timeless as it presents both a classic and modern design in one. The design was tragically redesigned in 2019, removing the use of Mrs. Eve on the cover and the orange title. The white Penguin Classic strip was also fattened. The removal of some of the charm of the series is one thing, but the main problem with this is that now the bookshelf of classics is visually divided in two. A large part of the appeal of classics, and the reason to use a template design, is for uniformity across books. That uniformity is disrupted by even minor changes. A similarly templated design to the Penguin Classics is the Oxford World Classics, which feature a white strip over a unique image with serif font and red accents. White, like black, is neutral and therefore adaptable to any image, and the red is subtle enough to not be distracting. I like how the top of the spine features a detail of the cover image below a red strip. The Oxford World Classics aren't quite as aesthetically appealing as the Black Penguin Classics, but are still excellent examples of graphic design. Routledge Classics also use templated designs, but feature a full-page image rather than the strip design of Penguin and Oxford. The images Routledge uses are less classical than the other designs, and are more photographic rather than illustrative. This design decision makes the books, despite being classics, feel more contemporary. Unlike the previously mentioned designs, the Routledge Classics don't immediately look like templates unless paired with others from the series. While still being a solid design, I don't actively seek these books out, and the only copy I own is of Russell's ABCs of Relativity. With the good classic designs fresh in mind, we inevitably have to talk about the Dover Thrift Editions. These books are just plain ugly. The Dover design, in theory, is similar to the Penguin Classics in that they feature a unique image with a graphic strip for the title and author, and the name of the series is placed on a smaller strip separating them. But a world of difference is made by a few design decisions. Most offensively, the graphic strips are a bright blue. Saturated blue, not being a neutral color, is a terrible idea for a template that has to adapt to a variety of images. We can improve the design very easily simply by removing the redundant and outdated gradient from the blue and darkening it. This preserves the bright blue as a highlight color while not overwhelming the overall design with a demanding blue. Another questionable design choice was to have the strip not just curved, but curved upward, which is the opposite of the natural direction implied by the design. The strip is an overlay of the image, but the upward curve makes the image look like the element that is doing the overlaying. The strip is also not even, as it gets wider at the ends for no apparent reason, clashing with the text that doesn't follow this pattern. Additionally, the text within the strip is in an arch rather than an arc, meaning that the text doesn't actually bend to accommodate the curve. The title text is in a small caps that is so subtle as to look like a visual mistake, and the author name in yellow is too light and should be in caps. The overall design can be improved so easily by fixing these design decisions that it is baffling that these designs exist as they are at all. I don't own a single one of these books and never will because they're just that bad. No discussion of philosophy books would be complete without mentioning the Hackett Classic series. I have a bunch of these ubiquitous short books despite their lack of interesting graphic design. The cover features no images in favor of a plain typography treatment and flat color background. The books look scholarly, which is another way of saying boring. But unlike the Dover thrift editions, at least these cover designs don't hurt the eyes. While browsing through these books, I found the issue of Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling, which utilizes the same typographic layout, but instead of the flat background has a textured image. This elevates the design immensely, and it would be so much better if every Hackett Classic used texture and image in this way. Of all the Hacketts that I own, all are the same size except one, Kant's Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals. It bothers me to no end that this book is not uniform with the rest of the Hackett Classics on my shelf. The textured Fear and Trembling cover reminds me of another template-based series, A Very Short Introduction. Each of these books present a unique textural painting as a background with a uniform text treatment featuring a funky, modern font for the title. This approach to template design makes every issue feel original and collectible. There is an issue for just about everything, and there is no limit to the design's ability to present unique textures. The abstract design is evocative of a Mark Rothko painting. Another excellent introductory series is How to Read by W. W. Norton. This series is unified by watercolor paintings of the authors they introduce readers to on papery tan backgrounds. The paintings are well done and add production value that isn't present in stock imagery-based designs. I've collected a bunch of these, and they are all well-written introductions to their topics. They even got Slavoj Žižek to do the issue on Lacan. The last of the templated designs I want to discuss is the Oxford Handbook series. These hefty books are well-organized collections of work on a given subject. The designs are a classy black similar to the Penguin books, but feature a Bodoni-based type treatment. There is a subtle touch of unique color to the title of the book, and I appreciate the 4 lines aligned to the Oxford Handbook of that unify the cover with the spine and back. The appeal of the templated book designs is their visual consistency, but templates are not the only way to achieve this. Instead of using a template, some series can create thematic unity by utilizing shared styles and elements. A balance of unique and shared elements make for a series of books that both stand out and blend together. Perhaps the best example of this is the work of Albert Camus, whose modern editions of his books present bold, black and white abstract compositions. These books show how evocative simple geometry can be when arranged in patternist compositions. Unfortunately for me, I purchased a used copy of The Plague from Amazon, only for it to arrive as a different cover edition from what it was displayed online. Now my Camus collection is tainted by one book that stands out next to the rest. The works of Michel Foucault are a similar example of presenting an author's body of work as a stylish series. These books demonstrate how to do stock imagery right. A simple image of an object is floating in the center of the composition, which is immediately elevated by the simple addition of a figure label. These transform the objects into something worthy of inspection and contemplation. The text treatment on these books is also eloquent, with the title and author separated horizontally by a rule. I love the Young Extract series for their abstract patternist designs unified by a circular visual theme. I also love the designs on Alan Watts' books, which feature very elegant but readable text over a flat earthy colors. A common, but uninspired, approach to cover design is to simply use a portrait photo or painting of the author. This is serviceable and appropriate, but lacking in originality and creativity. Using portraits is more valid for older authors who lived before photography and have only one or just a few portrait images available. This is because such portraits have a distinctly iconic role, unlike photographs, which are plentiful and therefore less memorable. The portrait of Kant used in the Penguin edition of Critique of Pure Reason is iconic and synonymous with the author, but bothers me. The painting is in chiaroscuro lighting, which points a spotlight directly on Kant's forehead as if to say, "Look how big my brain is, I'm so smart." Perhaps I'm just projecting, but it seems a little untasteful. An example of how to do a portrait cover right is The Freud Reader. This book's simple design elevates the photographic composition by placing the image of Freud alongside colorful rectangles in an almost naively readable text. The portrait in profile creates momentum towards the center of the book and is balanced by the geometry. Speech Acts by John Searle is how to do a portrait cover wrong. The book's portrait is just a plain old photograph of the author with nothing special or interesting about it. Searle is partially in shadow, and his eyes aren't even all the way open. Nothing about this cover makes me want to open the book, as it looks like it was written by just some guy rather than a philosopher. On top of that, the design uses Helvetica, which is easily the most overrated and overused font that lacks any personality. Unfortunately, the topic of portraits means we have to talk about Dover again. The Dover releases of The World as Will and Representation, translated by E.F. Champagne, are considered the best translations available, and therefore are the definitive versions worth reading. But the cover design is baffling. Looking at one volume doesn't raise alarm bells on its own, but when both volumes are brought together, the problems are overwhelming. 2 volumes of the same book should bear related designs, but for some reason that is beyond me, the design was changed between volumes only slightly enough to be annoying. The first volume is in a sans serif font, but the second volume isn't in a serif font. The first volume has outlines around the cover portrait, and the second volume does not. The spines are completely different, with only the first volume having a bunch of meaningless horizontal lines. The second volume, for questionable reasons, even includes a portrait of Schopenhauer on the spine. A portrait on the spine looks strange on a shelf, especially when paired with the first volume lacking such a portrait. I have no clue how these changes in volume occurred, because they had to be consciously decided upon by a designer or publisher who should have known better. Because of these problems and the lack of an interesting type treatment, I had to redesign these covers. I kept the same design style, but changed the text to emphasize the words will and representation, and I changed the portraits to graphic images. I wanted to show how simple visual abstraction and a solid type treatment are all you need to create a compelling philosophical design. I contrasted squares and circles in the 2 volumes to represent the associative difference between will and representation as discrete and indiscrete. Philosophy is simultaneously the easiest and the hardest genre to design book covers for because of the abstraction inherent in the subject. It is hard because there is no concrete objects of representation that present the themes of a philosophy book, but is easy in that any kind of geometric abstract design can evoke philosophy. In the case of Ecritz or Principia Mathematica, all you need are some circles and text to create sufficiently engaging covers. In some cases, no visual is even necessary to adequately present a book. Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit has no image or graphic besides a few horizontal bars to separate the text. The minimalism works because of the text treatment, which sees the title in italics contrasted with the lifeless Helvetica. A minimalist design like this is never going to blow anyone's mind, but is competent and tasteful. There is little room to go wrong with minimalism. Even greater than this design is the related Introduction to the Reading of Hegel by Alexandre Kojève. While also being minimalistic, this design is far more bold in effect. The flat matte maroon finish is a color not commonly seen and is intriguing. It leaves room for both white and black text to differentiate the title from the subtext. All this cover needs to perfectly present the content of Hegel is a simple black spiral shape. My inclination towards buying books with quality covers has not always served me well. It is important to focus on purchasing books from reputable publishers with scholarly translations. While browsing for books in the public domain, there are deceptive copies available that should be avoided. I once purchased a copy of The Ego and Its Own by Max Stirner based on the cover art without giving it much thought. Of the several versions available, I automatically opted for the one that featured the iconic illustration of Stirner on the cover without realizing that it was from a print-on-demand company. The book I received was questionably short, with no back design and poor graphic design in the contents of the book. The body of the text on the pages extended too far to the top, and the text had too many words per line. I also have a couple of books which don't even have text on the spines, such as The Problems of Philosophy, published by DigiReads, and Parmenides and Empedocles, published by Wittgenstock. Among the greatest of philosophy book covers is Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre. This iconic cover is purely typographic, but the typography is expressed through watery washes. The type has nauseating physicality to it that perfectly matches the themes of the book. Sartre's Existentialism is a Humanism is also an excellent cover, which uses a provocatively simple image of an empty park bench. My copy of Being and Nothingness doesn't fare as well. This cover breaks the rules of graphic design 101 by unnecessarily underlining text that is already emphasized by being bolded. The underlining isn't even consistent with Sartre's name and the word nothingness underlined, but not being and. On top of that, the image of Sartre used has a weird colorization and line gradient that just look confused more than anything. The current version of the cover available is far better with an interesting geometric type treatment. Another one of my favorite covers is the Basic Writings of Nietzsche. This authoritatively grayscale design features an ink-wash painting of a man with one eye covered by the title in an abstract container. The painting doesn't need to look like Nietzsche to accommodate the vibe of his philosophy. That distinct aura of Nietzsche is so alluring that a search for him on Amazon reveals all sorts of Nietzsche collections and editions, which probably have the same quality as the unestablished publishers discussed previously. The opposite of these cheap, questionably translated books is the Red Book by Jung, which comes in an imitation leather binding with a ribbon for place marking. Such a presentation is perhaps a bit dramatic, but is fitting for the content it contains. Martin Heidegger is also subject to good book designs. One version of Being in Time uses pure typography and a single circle to create a piece reminiscent of constructivism. This again shows how all that is needed for a good design is a competent type treatment. An alternative cover boldly features body copy in handwriting from Heidegger right on the cover, along with a few leaves. This design is especially contemplative, and it makes the viewer imagine being on a walk in an autumn day. I also enjoy the cover for his Introduction to Metaphysics, which reminds me of computer programming with syntax highlighting text and an off-black background. Before closing off this video, I would like to do one more redesign, this time of The Evolution of Modern Metaphysics, Making Sense of Things by A.W. Moore. What I like about this book is that it's big and purple. What I don't like is the typography. The design violates basic typography by using a whole 3 different typefaces, which is too many for establishing basic contrast. In particular, there are 2 different sans serif fonts in use, which are too similar to have contrast, but too different to work together. This is apparent in the O's, which are vertical in one font and horizontal in the other. Similarly lacking in contrast is how the 3 text elements are all slightly different sizes, which doesn't establish hierarchy. All text is equally vying for attention in spite of how the series name and author are less important than the main title. The name of the series, The Evolution of Philosophy, is very similar to the name of the book, so they shouldn't both be in large text. This can be fixed by using a condensed font to place the whole series name in one line, which still makes it plenty large enough to read. The use of small caps also has to be fixed, because it is used without reason and looks bad when spread across multiple lines. I also need to move the Cambridge logo to the center so that it no longer tilts the design to the left. I decided to add an abstract image to convey the idea of metaphysics, and again, I stress how easy it is for simple abstract shapes to convey the depth of philosophy. For this, I used the default Blender cube, which is in itself a sublime object, and truly the ideal platonic form of a cube.